Hello. Welcome to the programme.
Hello. Have a look at these. They're just some of the national daily newspapers you can buy in Britain. The Guardian, The Independent, the Daily Telegraph, the Sun, the Daily Mail, the Times.
How do people choose which newspaper to read? What's the difference between them? Well, one very important factor is the politics of the paper.
Yes, listen to some people talking about the papers they read. Which two papers do they think are on the left politically?
And which two papers are on the right?
I read the Guardian newspaper because politically it's left of centre, so I suppose it corresponds with my politics.
I read the Daily Telegraph because that's a paper that my parents buy.
I read the Guardian or the Independent, which are liberal left-wing newspapers. I never read the Daily Telegraph. It's too right-wing for my taste. It's too conservative.
We read the Sun newspaper. We find the crossword is easy to do.
I read the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail, which are very right-wing newspapers, because I like to have something to disagree with.
I read the Times because the articles are very, very clear and the English is very good.
So, these are the papers they say are on the left politically. The Guardian and the Independent.
And these two were described as right-wing papers, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail. So, if you see someone reading the Telegraph, for example, does that tell you something about their political opinions?
Well, perhaps. That's the next question we asked. Can you judge people by the paper they read? ¿Se puede juzgar a una persona por el periódico que lee?
I don't think you can judge people by the paper they read, because I read a right-wing newspaper, but I don't have right-wing views.
I think you can judge people by the newspapers they read, but you have to be careful because a lot of people buy a newspaper just out of habit and they don't really think about the politics of the newspaper.
I think you can judge people to a certain extent by the newspaper they read. For example, the Telegraph is really quite a right-wing newspaper. But I think generally people choose the newspaper that they find easiest to read.
People choose the newspaper that they find the easiest to read.
That's one factor, anyway. But how about the content of the different newspapers? What types of story are newspapers and their readers interested in? Well, stories about the royal family are always popular.
And many newspapers go to a lot of trouble to get exclusive photographs and scoops. Do you remember that word from our last programme? Scoops. Exclusivas.
According to The Sun, this photograph remained locked in an American bank vault for 7 years. The full picture, with a strategically placed crown, is splashed across its centre pages. The Duke made no comment today about the photo, taken when he was 24 on a camping trip in Canada. The Sun fell foul of the royals in 1989 after printing one of the Queen's private family photographs. It eventually agreed to pay £100,000 to charity as a means of apology. Today, the MP Peter Bottomley tabled a Commons motion in protest.
Many ordinary decent people are very upset, and they're saying, will Parliament do something to restrain this?
But The Sun is adamant it hasn't breached royal privacy.
Here you have a very prominent, very well-known figure in a rather extraordinary situation. And from our point of view, and I would think from the point of view of any editor of any tabloid paper, it is a picture that had to be published.
The Sun scoop may have renewed calls for laws against press intrusion of privacy, but it's unlikely to face any action unless the Press Complaints Commission is asked to investigate.
The Press Complaints Commission, un organismo encargado de atender las quejas sobre la prensa. What do you think, Vanessa? Do you think it's right for newspapers to publish private pictures of the royal family?
No. I think the royal family should be allowed the same sort of privacy as other people.
But is it possible to stop this sort of intrusion of privacy?
No, I suppose it isn't. The royal family has always been headline news. Way back in the 1950s, the biggest news story of the decade in Britain was, well, let's find out what it was. Over to the newsroom.
Good evening. Here is the news from the BBC in London, and these are the headlines. The coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. And the British flag is on top of the world. But perhaps the biggest story of the decade is the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II. Over now to our media affairs correspondent, Anna Pilkington. Anna, how have the media dealt with the coronation?
Well, Trevor, the coronation has certainly made the headlines. Look at these. I've never seen such big headlines. The British people have never before been offered such comprehensive coverage of a royal event. All the newspaper editorials think that the young Queen Elizabeth is just wonderful.
So it's been a good year for Britain's newspapers.
Well, Trevor, many people have followed the big events on cinema newsreels, and over 1 million people watched the coronation on television. Some people are saying that television is becoming so successful that newspapers will soon be obsolete.
No newspapers by 1960. That's our prediction here at the BBC. And now our other main story. A man from the British Commonwealth hit the headlines in every newspaper when he climbed Everest, the highest mountain in the world. Edmund Hillary from New Zealand placed the British Union Jack at the top of Everest after climbing the mountain. And finally, I've just been handed a story from the back pages of the Evening Echo. It's about a young lorry driver from Memphis, Tennessee, who is upsetting parents all over America. Parents have been warned not to let their daughters listen to the music of Elvis Presley, as it is such a bad influence. How dreadful. That's all the news from the BBC in London. Good night.